Some women are simply born rich, confident, and naturally magnetic to their desires. Let's be clear, this podcast is not for them. However, if you're a soul-driven, visionary, or entrepreneurial woman who's been on a mission to learn how to create a better future bursting to come out of you, welcome to my world. I'm Jo Warwick, and this is Rich, Sexy, and Free. I've dedicated most of my career to helping women get to their core power and unlock the missing pieces for their own unique success. You may already know me as the author of The Big Book of Love. With 30 years experience in psychology, embodiment, manifesting, and energetics, we will be exploring together and with guests the keys to becoming rich, sexy, and free. So if this excites you, don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite platform so you can stay up to date with the podcast. See, I am so happy to have you here. And just before you jump on, I think it's so important to share with the listeners. So this is our second time of recording this. And if you follow me on Instagram or any of my social media platforms, you'll know that I did an entire post about how I fucked up the first time round and yet learned from it so much. And it was such an empowering post for so many people who read it, and also of the experience for myself. I'm so grateful that you said yes and that we're here again. So I look forward to this. Welcoming as our very special guest today, Makhosi, the Royal Shaman. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Of course, I would say yes to doing this again. We had an absolutely amazing conversation the first time, but I know that when those sorts of things happen, there's always going to be something juicy that comes through anyway. For those of you who are listening and don't know who I am, I'm Makhosi. My brand is called the Royal Shaman. That's actually essentially what Makhosi translates into. Makhosi is a title. These days, my work is really as a metaphysical wealth mentor to the world's most incredible thought leaders. I'm spiritual advisor to top entrepreneurs, celebrities, powerful public figures, and really so much of my work is centered around spiritual self-mastery and translating that into soulful success. I'm really passionate about helping people to create aligned abundance, but also to experience true freedom and all the different ways that can happen: emotional freedom, financial freedom, time freedom, and the freedom to be one's authentic self, which I think is one of the most important pieces. I got my start in business as a kid. I go way back. My first experience in the business space, I was like 9 and living with my Amish Mennonite family, selling rhubarb pies at the Amish market. I started my first business at 12. I started a tutoring company. I also was reading tarot for kids in middle school to make a little bit of extra money to pay for my little cell phone that I wanted to have. I've always had business in my background. I have 2 bachelor's degrees in both business and marketing management, and I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade now and made millions myself, helped my clients to make millions, but more importantly, from alignment. I was born into this life having certain spiritual gifting, but always putting it on the back burner. And when I was 23, 24 years old, graduated from college, was married with my first child, and skyrocketed to success in a direct sales company called Pure Romance. And it was so funny because I had this aha moment. I was like, wow, this is what everybody tells you success looks like. This is what they tell you you're supposed to want and you're supposed to strive for. And here I had it all at 24. And so I had a quarter life crisis and I started asking bigger questions like, who am I really? And what are we here for? What is the purpose? And all of this took me on a spiritual journey that led to me spending 5 years in initiation specifically in Africa. I was traveling back and forth. And that culminated in me completing an initiation, well, 7 initiations actually, in South Africa. to become what is called a Sangoma or a Zulu shaman, but also many of them would probably refer to me as a Sanusi because of my gifting and the kind of work that I do as a leader, but also in my role of advising and mentoring some of the world's most incredible leaders.
Well, that's done. Thanks so much.
End of podcast. Bye.
It was funny as you were saying that. I had an insight into my own journey, and I'd never thought about it in that way as you described it. 24, you got it all. And the title of this podcast is Rich, Sexy, and Free. So I'm 27 when I started reconnecting with myself. At that point in my life, I was rich, sexy, and free in what everybody else said it should be. I was hot, young, sexy as fuck, having a great sex life, having this wonderful Sex in the City life. I had this incredible space. I was working for a company, like my dream job. I was traveling all over the world doing sporting events with other Olympians. And I had these great friends, and everywhere I went, I had bottles of champagne and luxury goods and all of these things. And I felt free on some level. There was money, there was recognition, there was a big job title, there was lots of sex, lots of fun. And yet, as you say, you stand there at that point and it was just like, why is this not fun anymore? That's when I started my journey. And I blame The Alchemist entirely because I read that book and that was like, oh, this is speaking to my soul. And I remember this. And I had kept, again, putting my gifts on the back burner. So yeah, that journey of then going off and looking for something deeper. In that process of you becoming who you are now, you have clearly owned your voice. But I'd like to know, when was the pivoting point, do you think, that not just awakened you to your voice, because that is part of the spiritual journey, but really kind of turned it up and brought that power, that passion, that presence that you are now?
What's really interesting, I think for me, it hasn't been one specific moment, but it's been a series of moments. And it's almost like there are these like catalytic moments that invite me to share a certain aspect of my voice that maybe I haven't expressed before. Because in full transparency, I'm actually quite introverted, but I have astrologically very visible placements, like I'm a Leo rising, right? And also an Aries midheaven. So I feel like 90% of my life I spend wanting to keep to myself. It's like I want to be Belle from Beauty and the Beast with my beautiful library and just be in there by myself, living my best life. Like that is so much of my dream. And then things happen. Things happen mainly in the world. Big, some of the big things that have happened. And I think because of some of the work that I do in those moments where I'm kind of like Belle in the library, just alchemizing different ideas and really looking at the root causes of why are we here? Why is the world like this? And I'm integrating that in myself, but also looking at how I can translate some of those concepts to greater numbers of people, but also to the change makers, right? And so I do all of that work behind the scenes. And then there's these very powerful moments. I would say 2020, the pandemonium that we all experienced was definitely one of those moments. I'm so glad that we're doing this interview today because here in the US, we just had an election. This election, also another one of those moments because my way of responding to certain experiences is very fiery and can be very catalytic, very energizing. And when we have these moments, that's when I'm like, okay, time for me to bring my general hat out and say the uncomfortable things that some people might not want to hear. I think it's these kind of pivotal moments in society. Anytime I see these like seemingly insurmountable obstacles where everyone else kind of runs from them and like hides, those are the time where I'm like, all right, this is my moment to shine. This is where I belong in the midst of the chaos and craziness. Let me come and bring some insight, bring some stability, bring some vision out of this rebel. What can we bring? What can we actually create as things seem to be falling apart?
I love that. My journey has never been to be in the mess. I am always 3 steps ahead, which is the most fucking infuriating place to be. Like when anything is brewing, I'm always at the forefront. Like I've already been talking about it for ages. And then suddenly I see a wave of people talking about things. I couldn't be you because my nervous system is not designed. So when those chaos moments are blowing up, I've already done my work. So I'm then Belle. I'm like, I'm just going to hide out over here. I will just let this pass. It's like, oh, there's a storm. So I'm always ahead of the storm. And then I come out when the light starts to shine in the middle sometimes of the storm, and then after. But definitely when the storm is going, it's like, oh, I'll just let you do your stuff on that. So on that is the best passionate thing that's on your heart that you need to speak about?
Yeah, right now, I've been doing a lot of reflecting and not only on where we are in the world, but hidden royalty that is coming to the forefront. And I use the term royal, and it comes from this understanding that in this next season of humanity, our work is to be sovereign because we have certain aspects of our development are more important than others. There are certain times where being individualistic is more important. There are other times where community is more important, right? And it's understanding these kinds of ebbs and flows that are happening in the cycles of nature that we can start to see, oh, what is the medicine that's really necessary for this next iteration? There are a few different kinds of medicine that I see as being important. Number one is that our next generation of royalty, our next iteration of leadership, needs to first and foremost be sovereign in themselves, meaning that they are in their power and it's not dictated to them by a certain structure that says, oh, if you are in this position, that means you have dominion over everyone else. No, when I'm speaking of royalty, I'm talking about leadership that takes others into account, that takes their entire empire, meaning the people that they work with, their family, their community, but also the people whose lives that they're touching, even if they aren't fully aware of whose lives they're touching, that they take all of those people into themselves as they are making decisions about how we're moving forward. Because right now, so many systems are going to be rebuilt. So many ways of doing things are going to be restructured. And if we have leaders who are not aware of some of the shadows of where we're coming from that have created this chaos, that have created a world that isn't really equitable or accepting of diversity. And I don't just mean color of skin, I mean diverse experience. The natural order of things is diversity, is our unique differences and our acceptance of those unique differences. So if we let's say on a subconscious level, have a perception that a woman's role and purpose in life is to be a supporter. And that's like the extent to how we see a woman. But if you're called to lead, that's going to create problems. You're going to be creating a reality that doesn't allow for your full expression and for your full purpose, right? So that's a lot of the work that I do is supporting people in that. Another thing that's come up too is that we are moving into an age where community is going to be crucial. And I'm seeing this as number one, a great financial opportunity. Not that it needs to be financial, because I don't believe that all communities need to be monetized. A lot of people, because we're coming from an individualistic society, don't know how to be in community with other people, don't know how to be vulnerable, don't know how to, especially women, we have a lot of issues around our trust in one another. Many of us can remember being in high school and some of the betrayals that we experienced, and we're carrying those wounds. And so we've got to be able to look at those and start healing them, but also bring that through in what we're creating on our teams, on our public platforms, and so on and so forth.
This has come up a lot in the last week in the conversations I've had as someone who doesn't live in America, and also speaking to friends who are British who live in America. Our societies are different. And one of the things you said about community, not everything being monetized, I don't see that as something in the UK. There's so many small community spaces, much more about having a cup of tea with your neighbor. I don't think it's as good as it was. What would you say to our listeners as the thing for them to focus on to do their part in this process forward?
Number one, recognizing in this concept of sovereignty that we have to take responsibility for our safety, for our sense of safety, that first and foremost, it is created within, and then using the tool of discernment to be able to gain some clarity around, okay, I'm safe with me. I don't abandon me. I'm not going to abandon me for any space that I'm in. Is this a space that will allow for me to express certain more vulnerable things? Am I safe to do that in this place? And if you start to recognize certain things that are showing up in that community that let you know that actually, no, that's not really a safe place for you, finding that place or creating it. Many of us are being called to create that space. And for some of us, it's going to be centered around a common hobby, a part of a journey that we're on, like being a mother to a toddler. It's another example. Mm-hmm. I actually came to this realization when my husband and I were dating a long time ago. We've been together since 2009, 15 years in, okay? But in those first 2 years, when we were feeling out like whether we were going to be together mm-hmm. and really like commit to the long term, I realized I was like, I don't need you to be my everything.
Absolutely.
And actually, I don't want you to be my everything, because having one person be your everything is, number one, a lot of freaking pressure for that person. And it's very suffocating and stifling to them and their interests and their development. Number two, it also creates a bit too much codependency of anytime I need something, this person has to be the one to give me everything. So I'm going to say the same thing about community, and I'm going to say the same thing about friendships, that it's okay for us to have relationships that provide us with different things. Like I have my business besties. I have my husband for specific things. I have just a couple people that are my friends. And to get to that level, it's a thing for me.
I totally get it. I'm very private as a person, which is quite a conflict. What you were saying was, I've put it in terms of this maturity, this psychological maturity of not only the society or individuals. And I talk about the sort of psychological, spiritual, emotional, mental, and sexual maturity. They're all separate things and they all grow up differently. And that maturity of what you were talking about, that sovereignty that comes from that place, you're sustained. Yes, you can be fed by healthy community, healthy friendships, healthy partnership. All of that is really important, but they're just the cherries on the cake. They're not the cake. And when you haven't got a good, solid, healthy, moist, well-cooked cake, which is you and your soul connection and all of that, then of course, if you have a crumbly cake, you're going to be dependent on all of those things.
I feel like the more that you come to love and accept all these different aspects of you, and you really know yourself, that's the key to being able to be vulnerable in the right places and with the right people. Sometimes we put labels on certain relationships or on certain people, like that's my friend, and then we make it mean a certain thing. And what I'm realizing, friend can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I have recognized that I've just made assumptions of, oh, well, we're friends, so that means blank, right? And instead paying attention to observing people's behavior, observing what comes out of their mouth, using discernment to determine, is this community, is this space ultimately what I want?
Isn't that the incredible catalyst of the US election? In some ways, is creating an incredible opportunity for people to self-reflect. Like who I am and what I'm saying. Do I like what they're saying? Do we fit anymore? Depending on how intimate that relationship. And can I also forgive and have compassion and recognize just because you have a thought or a belief around this, but is that who you really are? And can we have a conversation about what does that really mean to you?
And to what degree, right? Our ancestors were living, where for the most part, everyone lived in a village and you grew up in that village, and most people never leave. And you hardly ever get new people, right? And now we just get on a plane and we fly to another continent, right? So we have so much more movement. For most of human history, that common goal was survival.
We're going to grow this wheat together and we'll,
Right. And that's the extent of we can have differences in opinions or perspectives and even beliefs as long as we can agree to grow this wheat together. It always somehow comes back to identity, the lens over the light. And when we change the identity or that lens, it expresses in different ways. And so I think many of us are having these conversations around, what is my identity as a mother? What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be American? I would say that's really at the core of this human transformation. And on an individual level, we are reinventing and alchemizing who we believe we are, and in a way that is going to serve us better going forward.
As you were talking, I saw this image of the prism of the refraction of light and how we do that individually and how we do that with identity. It's such an interesting subject. I think it'd be really good to weave us back to what you were saying about with you and your husband, the dating. When you look at how the world has moved towards the idea of dating, the idea that we can go online and buy someone like a tin of beans, like, oh, I'll buy my tin of beans and I'll have a cup of tea and then I will swipe this person. And this person who is an image, like good branding, instead of listening to their own safety, behaved as though they've walked into the post office butt naked and gone, here's my national security number, here are my bank details. They've been so vulnerable jumping into bed with someone as though that gives you any idea how to make a relationship, that you're going to have sex first and then wonder why you don't know if you like somebody. As a relationship therapist for such a long time, when I look at this behavior, you think, where is your sense of self-respect, your identity, your compassion for your own body? Where is your boundary setting or even your ability to stay safe as a human being? I would love your thoughts on that.
One thing that I notice is we tend to be extremist. For so long, women's sexuality was so suppressed to an extreme degree that in how humans behave, it makes sense that the rejection of that is the opposite extreme,
Absolutely.
which is like extreme promiscuity or sometimes complete withdrawal
Yeah.
from any sexual activity at all, or from the possibility of relationships. We
Yeah.
tend to move in these extremes of like, I'm going to be hyper or I'm going to be hypo and completely withdraw myself. But to me, healed is in a harmony in the middle, right? It's situational, it's contextual, it is mindful.
Yeah.
And I think while I think sex is like a wonderful aspect of being in a relationship, especially for women, it's so pivotal to our ability to connect with someone. And there has to be a sense of safety for us to feel like we can really be surrendered and connected in that space. One thing that I always just wondered about dating is also just the mechanism of going about dating seems kind of weird. Yes, there's the weird ordering pizza situation where we think, oh, I can just add green peppers and mushrooms and I should be
Yeah.
able to get exactly what I want,
Oh,
which
exactly.
actually you don't want. I don't think
No,
a lot of people know or really realize that many of the things that are like your preferences, you actually don't want because you would just be with yourself.
I love my own company. It's great. But if you're going to date, you're here for difference, aren't you?
You're here for, to me, it goes back to that shared vision is like a
Yeah,
crucial part to your relationship, certain shared values, um,
yeah,
but complementary approaches, complementary
yeah.
ways of being, which means that you do things differently, or the things that you prioritize might be slightly different, but they're coming from certain shared values. And I always thought that it's weird that our way of going about dating is to go enter into these very isolated bubbles of a table in a restaurant. And that is like the extent of our dating. And then we're going to determine if we're going to be together. I'm like, no, we should do like a survivor type dating situation where it's let's throw you in the wolves at a daycare.
Yeah.
Let's see how you act in a group project. Let's build something together and
Oh
see
yeah,
what
get an IKEA test. That got to be the thing. Yeah.
happens, right? Like I feel like that's so much more telling than you being completely dressed up at like your absolute best. And I'm not saying that on the first date you should do this, but I do think maybe before we get to the stage of sleeping together, that we should see each other in these like pivotal moments because it's those moments that really show us who we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that takes us to a lovely full circle of what we were talking about at the beginning. This discernment and understanding yourself and going from that immaturity to maturity of what do you want if you want to have a different experience, knowing your own identity. What is it that really matters to you? And I think this is such a core part to that discernment. It's okay to take your time to figure it out, to work it out, to work out who you are, to work out and not get swept up with other people's agendas, drama. Always shows if you actually take your time and somebody starts to throw their toys out in any scenario, you're like, right, well, that told me anyway, so I didn't need to do it. So here's the answer. So, yeah, just such a rich conversation. So beautiful. Not at all what we imagined. As we wrap up, because I know that you and I we could carry on putting the worlds to rights and it would be lovely. What would be your last thoughts to share?
I really feel like the last 4 years and probably the next 5 years and even beyond, this is going to be a historic time for humanity across the world. And I think what a lot of people have this just like deep sense or deep knowing of is that change is inevitable. It's going to happen. Change and death are the two things on this planet that are always going to happen. And it's going to continue to change exponentially. And the best thing that we can do is to really become a master at embracing change, to actually embrace being an agent of change. And I think that comes back to what so much of our conversation has been about giving yourself permission to self-reflect, to reevaluate, to to question your own standards and values and ideas about who you think you need to be, about what it is that you really want, because we've all been programmed. Like that's just part of being human, that we are conditioned to think certain ways, act certain ways, believe that certain things are possible for us. And now more than ever, it's important that we question those things. And if we can, from a more objective place, be able to examine and say, you know what, actually, that way of thinking hasn't been serving me. Right. My mom and I have these conversations. My mom is very young. She had me as a teenager. When I say very young, my mom just turned 52. And she says all the time, I'm old, I'm old, I'm old. I can't do that because I'm old. And I'm like, Mom, you could literally meet a man. You all could get married in 2 years. You could have a 25-year marriage potentially. You could have an entire other career, like a dream career. Like there's so much left. And so I think the opportunity for us all right now, and I'm encouraging my clients to do this, especially with concepts like motherhood, like leadership. What does it mean to be a leader? And really being empowered to start creating new identities, new pathways. One way I'm doing this myself is really shifting my idea around what does it mean to be a spiritual leader? My own spirit squad has been encouraging me to really assess where we're going. Is that going to continue to serve us? Is that going to work for who I'm here to be? So I have to just navigate a world that is used to seeing women in this category, mothers in this category, entrepreneurs in this category, leaders this way, right? And dismantle all of those, seeing who I am and what ways of being I've accepted and whether or not those are serving me and going to allow for me to shine my light.
Hallelujah. I'm so with you. I'm so with you.
Yes.
And you said the words, I go first. And it is such a thing. I've been my biggest client. I've been my biggest journey. I've been my biggest and ever evolving experience. And it is that it's okay to change. I'm Joe Warwick 2000.457 probably now. But that's okay. I'm still Joe Warwick in the core. And following what lights me up. Oh, such a juicy, wonderful conversation. Makhosi, it's been a delight. Would you like to tell people where they can find you to find out more about your amazing work?
Absolutely. So the best place these days is to find me on Instagram at the Royal Shaman. Also on my website, theroyalshaman.com. And I also have a slew of content over on YouTube. And my channel, of course, is The Royal Shaman.
If you're watching on YouTube, the tags are all in the bottom. And if you're listening on any of the lovely podcast platforms, you will find everything in the show notes. I love our conversations and I will definitely enjoy having another one. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to talk again as life shifts and changes.
Yes, I'd love that. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. It's been great to connect with you today. But before you leave, if you haven't already, don't forget to come and be part of the community. Just simply go ahead and visit richsexyandfree.com. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the podcast.